and then we're going to go right into the general county programs, and we will take public comment on both general services and general county programs outside organizations later. So, good afternoon, Mr. Nisbet.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair and members of the board. It's a pleasure to be here this afternoon to make the presentation for the General Services Department. I have with me to the right Brian Duggan, our business manager, and then also behind me Jennifer Slayman, IT, Patty Langlands, Facilities, Property and Fleet, and Ray Aromatorio, Risk Management. The General Services proposed operating budget for fiscal year 2012-2013 is $65.2 million. This figure is $1.6 million less than the previous year. Of this amount, approximately $42 million is payments made from all of the other departments to the 7 internal service funds that General Services manages. The remainder comes from the general fund and other revenue sources. The department's proposed capital budget of $8.8 million is approximately $6 million less than the previous year. And of the department's total budget, $7.6 million is the department's general fund contribution. This figure includes the department's budget target, but it also includes cost allocation revenue, which is revenue provided by the non-general fund departments for purchasing, mail service, and facility maintenance. The number of employees proposed for next year represents a 29% decrease compared to fiscal year 2003-2004, when the department had 170 employees. This next slide lists some of the department's accomplishments this year. 1, we completed an audit, assessment, and redesign of the countywide telephone circuit network. From this assessment, a new vendor was selected to provide telephone services. This change will save the county approximately $1 million over the next 3 years. 2, we contracted the processing of all worker compensation claims that occurred prior to July 1st, 2010 to a third-party administrator. These claims we typically refer to as tail claims. This move is estimated to save $1 million over the next 10 years due to the elimination of 2 claims analyst positions. 3, we provided support for all information and communication technologies during construction of and then move into the new Emergency Operations Center, or EOC. The effort also included relocating the county's primary data center from the basement of the county administration building, this building, to the enhanced computer room at the new EOC. 4, we completed installation of a 1 megawatt solar project on the Kyrie-Real campus, a project we're very proud of. This project was funded with qualified energy conservation bonds, which come with a subsidized interest rate provided through the Federal Stimulus Act. The project will provide approximately 2/3 of the electricity needs for the main jail. And then finally, we completed 3 large building projects. First, the Emergency Operations Center, as I mentioned, was completed this year at a total cost of around $7.9 million. The Santa Maria Court Clerk's Building at approximately $5.2 million is just being completed. And then the Public Defender remodel at the Santa Barbara Historic Courthouse at a cost of $5.8 million is just being completed, and the Public Defender is scheduled to move into the remodeled space by the end of June. The recommended budget for fiscal year 2012-2013 does allow the department to maintain the same level of service as the current year, but we can only do so by relying on one-time funding sources of $354,000. The department's recommended budget for this next fiscal year also includes $1.5 million for capital maintenance and/or deferred maintenance. The department has relied on this allocation over the years to slowly address the deferred maintenance backlog, which currently stands at approximately $30 million for all county buildings. And just to give the board an idea why the county has a $30 million backlog, there are 2 benchmarks listed on the bottom of the slide. And these allow us to measure how we're doing in facility maintenance compared to certain industry standards. So I'll just quickly read these 2 benchmarks. Benchmark number 1 says that a government entity like ourselves should have one maintenance worker per 50,000 square feet of space. And our calculation is that we currently have one worker per 69,000 square feet of space. Another benchmark that looks at it a slightly different way is that we should spend 1% annually on preventative maintenance and corrective maintenance of the replacement cost of the buildings. And using the assumption made there in parentheses, we're currently spending around 0.6% on these. And that is why we have this backlog that is of concern to us. So we are currently providing a maintenance service level that is below these accepted industry standards, and in the future we must find ways to devote a larger allocation towards deferred maintenance and capital maintenance, or reduce the square footage of buildings that we occupy. Otherwise, our maintenance backlog will continue to grow. And I believe this is the department's primary challenge over the next 2 years. Finally, preparing for the future. The department's expected budget gap for fiscal year 2013-2014 is $479,000. And this is primarily due, and you've heard it before from the other departments, due to salary and benefit increases fueled by expiring labor concessions and increased retirement and health costs. At this time in the department, there are no additional one-time funding sources identified to offset these increases. So the department will continue to seek other funding sources, possibly grants. We will look at reducing building space to help meet the county priorities. However, this budget gap will likely lead to additional service level reductions and an increased deferred maintenance backlog if not addressed. This concludes the budget presentation for General Services, and I'd be happy to answer any questions your board might have.
Thank you, Mr. Nisbet. Any questions on General Services? Supervisor Gray, then Supervisor Wolf.
Mr. Nesbitt, I submitted a question about space study because I'm wondering, I think it was inquiry number 26, but you answered it, but I'd like for you to just answer it so I get it on the record today.
Sure. Madam Chair, Supervisor Gray, and I'll also refer the public to page D173. So the question was about the point I made about how it is that we have deferred maintenance backlog and what we need to do to address it. One of the ways is to spend more money on deferred maintenance. Another way in these times, in our opinion, is to reduce the square footage of space that the county has, and then that's less cost for us to maintain. And the question was, do we have a current space utilization report that documents where all the departments are, where vacant space is, and where we're going in the future? And the answer to that question is we have a document that we do every 5 years, and that document is out of date. It was 2006 through 2011, and we're in the process of preparing the next volume of that document. And in the past, that document was done at a time where people thought the county was probably growing, and that's just not true today. And so this next volume will be looking at vacant space. We will have solutions potentially on how we can consolidate space, get out of lease space potentially, and eliminate county space. And again, that's one of our solutions. And as I said, my department's biggest challenge in the next 2 years is to do that. So on page D173, we do have a goal for ourselves that once we publish this document and move forward with some of its recommendations, that we would like to reduce county lease space by 10% and county-owned building space by 5%. And so that, I think, answers your question and puts it on the record.
CEO Waller.
Chair Farr, Supervisor, I'd like to take that thought just a bit further with a philosophy that I have, and I believe that our executive team shares, that we really need to look at creative ways to reduce our office space. And some of the things that we're considering are field-based inspections, where instead of inspectors driving tens of miles to get to the office, centrally located, and then spending another hour to get back out to their inspections, that they actually are able to start their day either from their home or from a nearby location, a nearby county facility where they may have dropped off a car, And what our goal is there is to enhance productivity, but also reduce the amount of office space that we currently have for these folks. So no longer is it our philosophy that every single county employee needs a separate workspace in a centralized location. In fact, we may be able to have a common workspace that many of our employees utilize, almost like a hotel room, sort of, where you come and you go, and we have computers there, we have telephones, cell phones, whatever you may need. So that's something that we're working on over the next year in coordination with Bob's efforts to really take a look at reducing overall office space.
Thank you. Supervisor Wolf and then Supervisor Lavanino.
Thank you. Mr. Nesbitt, I want to thank you and your team for some incredible work. It's greatly appreciated. The cost on the EOC, part of that was paid for by a nonprofit organization, is that correct? Wasn't it like $2 million?
Madam Chair, Supervisor Wolf, that's correct, and my recollection is it's right around $2 million.
So the cost to the county, if you just would subtract that, that would be the cost to the county.
That's correct.
And then I think CEO Waller and Supervisor Gray touched on the issue, and it's almost conflicting positions. One is the usage of space in the county buildings versus outside space that our county departments are renting. And I know through our meetings on DAC, we've been seeing over time a significant reduction in rental space out in the community. And I think that's really because of the team that you have and the departments wanting to get back into county buildings. So on one hand, we see the reduction in rental costs, but on the other hand, we're seeing more usage of space in our county buildings, which seems like that's a good thing. We don't want to spend the money on rental space, but according to what you're saying, though, if you look at the ratio, it may not, on paper, always look as good.
Madam Chair, Supervisor Wolf, I think I'm saying both. I think we can tackle both, but you're right. So reducing, in priority order, I would say reduce lease space for a general fund department before you reduce county space. So then you do the best job you can there. And then second priority, well, do we still have vacant county space? Well, that still costs money. So let's do consolidations and do the kind of things that CEO Waller just mentioned and see if we can reduce that. Space costs money. But I would say, yeah, get out of lease first and then also try to reduce county space. So that's why we've set up our goals kind of that way, 10%, 5%.
Okay, thank you.
Supervisor Lavanino.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Nesbitt, is on the deferred maintenance, I'm a little bit confused. So there's a $30 million backlog, but then you have this. So do we have $30 million worth of projects with a list that says these are our priorities, or is this simply the mathematical equation that you worked out that we have so much square footage and this amount of people, and that's the way it works out?
Madam Chair, Supervisor Lavanino, no, it's not just a mathematical formula that we worked out. We have a list of specific projects that is prioritized that totals up to the $30 million. Okay. I think the point of the benchmarks was to show that, to kind of show, well, that makes sense, that would be a phenomenon that's happening since it appears like we're a little below industry standard. But we have a list that we follow.
Supervisor Wolf.
Thank you, Madam Chair. In my board inquiry form, it was number 28, I had asked what projects were completed by General Services last year and what are anticipated to be completed in 12-13. So, and those were the deferred maintenance projects. But I don't see a total on the 12-13. Maybe someone can just add that up for me real quick.
Madam Chair and Supervisor Wolf, someone hopefully can add it up really quick to get the exact number. I can tell you, because I added it up in my office earlier, it's not 1.5 million, it's around 1.2 million. So when I said earlier our allocation for next year is 1.5, that's because in addition to those projects, our budget includes the funding of 3 FTEs out of that allocation.
Okay, and one of the projects is the dump road paving repair. And I'm just curious why that comes out of General Services and not, well, I guess it's because it's our property. I was going to say, why not roads? But it's county property.
Madam Chair, Supervisor Wolf, you're absolutely correct. It's not a road that's in the maintained roads system from Public Works. It's county property as opposed to right-of-way.
And the Kyriel campus parking lot patch, I thought that was already done.
Madam Chair, Supervisor Wolf, I don't have the details. If you'd like, I can ask Mr. Langlands, and maybe he knows. My guess would be that maybe there's a new patch that needs to be fixed.
Well, let me just say this. There's a lot of patches that need to be fixed out there, so good for you for working on those patches. Thank you.
Supervisor Gray.
Two questions. I don't see anything about the Veterans Memorial Building in Lompoc on our projects that have been completed. We're doing a lot, you know, the roofs, and then the other question is, just because I'm curious, on the EOC and the Santa Maria Court Clerk Building and the Public Defender's remodel, what were the bids and as compared to what it cost us? I'm trying to remember. I mean, it's been so long since we talked about what we thought it was going to cost, and maybe the bid's not the right word. The projected cost, when we said, okay, we're going to do the EOC, what did you tell me it was going to cost
Sure.
us?
Madam Chair, Supervisor Wolf, starting with your first question. So on board inquiry number 28, we only listed the projects that we were specifically using the allocation that we call deferred maintenance. That was $1.5 million last year and proposed $1.5 million for next year. Lompoc Vets Hall has been fortunate. It received that one-time federal money. It has also received some CBG grants. So we just didn't list those here because that wasn't the question. But clearly there's other projects that we're working on with other funding sources. To answer your second question, I don't know if I'll give it the detail you want. We may have to come back and provide the actual bids. But for the public defender and for the public defender, I'll start with public defender. That project, going all the way back to its earliest genesis, the budget has always been around, as I recall, 5.6 to 6 million. So when it's coming in at 5.8, it pretty much stayed the course from day one. The Emergency Operations Center, as you'll recall, had a very long life as it went through kind of the stages of deciding where to put it and how to design it and what it should be and whether or not it should be expandable. And so there was the most recent time where additional funds were added to that project, as you might recall, when the Betaravia administration building was decided not to go through. So at that point, the budget was enhanced as, and I don't remember the number, but maybe $1 million was then added to the project. So I think that project stayed pretty consistent, except for that last change where we were able to find the money to do the audio video, as you recall, and the enhanced computer room. That was added about a year ago. And then the final one, the court clerks. This project has about a 12-year history, as you are probably aware, and you may recall that it was actually mothballed because it came in over budget way back in the early 2000s. Once it got back on track, I think we're actually under budget on that project. We went back and forth with the state about that project because we wanted to make it clear that we were not paying more than what we had. And in the end, my understanding is it was all for naught because it came in under what the state and the county were arguing about. Yep.
Mr. Nesbitt, I have a couple of questions for you. The first is, when Mr. Parker presented his department's budget a couple of days ago, they're slating to eliminate some maintenance workers. A couple of plumbers and a welder and a sewer plant operator. And I understand probably through Public Works and Laguna Sanitation that there can be some backup there, but is there sharing, I mean, do you have a welder or plumbers as a part of the upkeep of the county buildings that you share staff with at all?
Madam Chair, we do not have welders, but we do have 1 or 2 plumbers. In general, we have been, over the last 5 to 10 years, I would say, we've been trying to move away from having specialized maintenance workers like plumbers, electricians, and painters, and trying to move towards generic positions that are maintenance workers, and then contract out the more specialized work. At this current time, we do have 1 or 2 plumbers that are part of our maintenance staff.
Okay. Well, one of my concerns is that, you know, for most of our buildings there and our parks and all, they're kind of grouped more in urbanized areas, but I'm particularly concerned about Kachuma and Halama because it takes so long to get there. And so I just wanted to know whether there was any sharing of staff for those kinds of maintenance activities. My other questions have to do, and maybe CEO Waller, you can help me here, in looking at these key general fund discretionary fund balances that we talked about a couple of days ago. Some of them it's clear which departments would be able to access it, whether it's roads or litigation or the jail operations. But for the capital, the $500,000 that we're proposing to increase in the capital budget, who actually has access to that? Because I'm assuming it's not necessarily Mr. Nesbitt's department when we're talking about capital projects, or is it?
Chair Farr, it's not necessarily general services. It's really dollars that are put there so that as the need for capital projects comes up throughout the year, that those individual projects can access it. So at this point, I don't believe there are any that are actually anticipated out of that $500,000. It's more what may come up mid-year that needs some capital improvements. And typically, we've done some small remodels with it. I think there's been a time or two that we've had a small parks project come out of it. And so for the most part, it needs to come through our CEO's office and be authorized, and sometimes to your board, depending upon the amount.
Okay, so it really is could be accessed by just about any county department then that would have a project that you would feel fit the criteria.
Yes, Chair, that's correct.
Okay, and is the same then for the deferred maintenance? Because Mr. Nesbitt talked about, $1.5 million for deferred maintenance, but I'm looking at this list and it, has 1.8 in there, proposing to add 2.8 and decrease by $2 million. So is there crossover in these figures, or are those totally separate?
Those are actually totally separate, and the way that funding is accessed is $1.5 million of it, I believe, is in general services, and $500,000 is in our parks department, or in our community services department parks division. Okay. And they use those throughout the year to either work off the list that Mr. Nisbet just mentioned of deferred maintenance, and Parks also has a list that's not quite as robust and as well organized, but that's one of the things that ACEO Ball will be working with them on this year to get that in a shape that's better prioritized.
Okay, so again, I'm not quite clear. That $2 million that you talked about, is that this proposed decrease of $2 million, or this is a different pot of money?
We're talking two different pots of money.
Okay.
The capital is one, and then the deferred maintenance is a separate one. And what Mr. Nisbet was just referring to when he was describing his answers to the board inquiry form is the deferred maintenance account.
Okay, but that's not this deferred maintenance account.
Yes, that is.
It is this.
Yes.
Okay, that's
Yes.
what I wanted to know. Thank you. Any other questions, comments for general services? All right. Supervisor Carvajal.
Madam Chair, I would be remiss if I didn't give kudos to Mr. Nisbet for a job well done again.
Yeah, very good presentation. Thank you, and thank you to your staff that keep our buildings humming along, particularly the elevators. or the lifts, as they're called. All right, we're going to move right now into general county programs, and I think that's you then, Mr. Alvarez.
Yes, thank you, Chair Farr and members of the board. As they pull up the PowerPoint, let me just give a little background. First of all, the General County Programs Department contains those programs and projects which are not directly associated with one specific department. Programs may move into or out of General County programs from other departments as they become established and more appropriate departmental structure is identified. This department is also used to establish fund balance for specific purposes, such as the new jail operating reserve or adding to the strategic reserve. And if you recall on our schedule that we were just referring to, that discretionary fund balance, you can see the total there that was set aside for next year was $6.4 million. That is flowing through this General County Program Department. In addition to the above, the General County Program Department is used to transfer general fund contributions for maintenance of effort to special revenue funds, which include public health, mental health, social services, and also there's another transfer to public works, as well as funding for the courts. And lastly, First 5 is included in the General County programs during the fiscal year 11-12, but it is moving into its own department in 12-13. and there are no general fund dollars associated with the first 5. So as we, back to the first slide, please, Dennis. Thank you. So as we look at the budget here, the operating budget is $1.4 million for 12-13. I'd like to point out that that's down from about $9 million last year. 2 elements accounted for the change. The first was, as we discussed, moving about $5 million out for first 5 as segregating that into a separate department. And the second was the libraries have now moved to the Community Services Department, and that's about $2.5 million that's moved out of there. So that change accounts for about a balance of $1.4 million. And that $1.4 million, along with the $6.4 million that we saw on that designation sheet, tie into the $7.8 million that you see as the use there of general fund contribution. And there is no capital being spent out of here. There will be 0 FTEs because the only remaining FTEs were those that were in the first 5 department. The accomplishments for 11-12 began setting aside funding for the future jail operations, maintain the existing level of funding at $1 million to provide health insurance to uninsured children in Santa Barbara County, and then working with the City of Santa Maria and using development fees, began remodel efforts at the Orcutt Library. For 12-13, the potential service level impacts, there are no potential service level impacts here. Again, there's no employees in this department. A change would be the first 5 is moving, as we discussed. Library funding is moving to community services. Increase in jail funding for next year. Our target is to set aside $2 million. That would give the cumulative balance for set-aside funds at $3 million. And then also, we're going to be discussing the RDA in this presentation as well. So the impact of the RDA dissolution is developing, and as we're seeing, as you'll see today, it's ever-changing, and we've got a couple new slides in here exactly to that fact. So certain aspects are unknown at this time. We did get our first distribution, as previously discussed, and those will be ongoing funding sources for the county. For preparing for the future, we see the increase in North County Jail operational funding, as previously discussed, as being a very large issue. The allocation for 13-14 would be to set aside general funds in the amount of $3.3 million, which would be bring the cumulative balance in that set-aside fund to $6.3 million at the end of fiscal 13-14. The impact of the RDA is expected to result in continued positive contributions to the general fund. And we would also be funding necessary capital infrastructure projects based on the identified needs, priorities, and available resources. That goes to what General Services was just talking about, the list of deferred maintenance and so forth. As we saw on the discretionary key fund balances, there is projected to be a little money identified there. I believe it was $2.8 million on that schedule that will be identified, and then we can look at that strategically as we go through the planning process and look at the capital needs. We might be able to throw a little bit more at that with that funding. And then also we will be developing this new strategic plan, and as we identify any actions that need to occur, this might be the account or department where we would set aside any funds for long-term planning purposes. Continuing on, we will retain a portion of the 11-12 concession savings for anticipated 13-14 funding, and we saw that also on that key discretionary fund balance sheet. And we'll continue to build on the county's strategic reserve. And then I did just hand out before we started 2 new slides. I'm told that there are copies in the back of these 2 slides, and they've been posted, I believe, as well. And so we've added this. This is a very recent, we talked about how fluid this is, based on some recent guidance that just came out by the way of a white paper, and I have Mike Gazzoni and the Auditor Controller staff here as well, if we have any detailed questions on this. So page D194 in the budget book displays the former RDAs and the successor agency that took its place, and it shows the activities which would include affordable housing. New California Committee on Municipal Accounting Guidance says that successor agency funds should be segregated as private purpose trust funds. And so future audits will likely follow that approach. So the successor agencies are separated within the budget for that purpose. So the activities that we're describing here of really segregating these funds, with the exception of the housing element, And the housing element, we're suggesting that that was retained within the CEO's department. We're going to be talking on the next slide about the action we're requesting is really to move those housing funds into the HCD Division of Community Services Department. We think it more appropriately belongs there. But the other activities that we're describing about moving these monies into the private purpose fund and activities, that's described in the separate board letter that is in tab 3 and the resolution in tab 7. So what you'll see is that you have the normal one for the entire county, and then you have these other resolutions and board letter specifically for the successor agency to the RDA. And that was in your package from day one in those reference tabs. And so on the next slide we have the action items here. And so what we're asking for administrative efficiency is that we recommend transferring, effective July 1, 2012, the former RDA Housing Fund and activities from the CEO's office to CSD, or Community Services Department, and the Housing and Community Development Division within that unit. And if this transfer is approved, direct the preparation of a final budget adjustment to transfer the Housing Fund to CSD and adjust the recommended budget to reflect the most current information available. And again, my apologies for putting this in at the last minute. Administratively, it makes it much easier to do it as we start the year at July 1st, and if it happens after that date, it's a lot more complex. So that is a recent adjustment, and that does conclude my...
Chair Farr, just to add to a little bit of the discussion that we've been having about the former RDA and the fluidity of the situation, literally over our lunch break, I received a letter that was sponsored by CSAC to our state representatives, because there's a proposal to balance the budget that would actually invalidate all of the direct pass-through agreements. Those are agreements that during the time that RDAs were in business, you may have a direct pass-through to lessen the impact. So, for instance, there were certain school districts that to lose their increment would have been a real hardship on. So as the RDA was put together, there was an agreement between the RDA and the school district to directly pass through certain amounts of money. So as I said, the most recent is that they are discussing actually invalidating those, which the result would be additional revenue to the state, less revenue to those taxing entities that had pass-through agreements. So that's absolutely late breaking, and frankly, I would anticipate we're going to see many similar type last-minute things from either the state, the Department of Finance, or actually litigation.
CEO Waller, just to follow up on that, because I did see that over the lunch break as well. In the case of the one RDA that was in the county in Isla Vista, we did have a pass-through agreement, I believe, with the schools. So if this should come to pass, that doesn't necessarily change anything for the county. What it does is it changes it for the school districts that were the recipients of that. Correct, Mr. Geis?
Yeah, Madam Chair and members of the board, let me give you a little bit bigger picture. In the Northern California, there were a lot of redevelopment agencies formed by cities and counties, and they negotiated 100% pass-throughs when they formed those agencies. Our agencies down here actually didn't negotiate for ourselves. We let the school districts, Goleta School Districts has the biggest negotiated pass-through of about 1.6 million. And also Isla Vista Recreation Park has the second biggest. So under that legislation, those two districts would lose, and Goleta is a basic aid school district, and so they would lose their basic aid money, and that would get redistributed to the other school districts within that tax rate area, which includes Goleta would get some back, and the Santa Barbara High School District would get a significant portion of that, reducing the backfill from the state. So we're a little bit different in Santa Barbara County, that if they eliminate these 1290 pass-throughs, it reshifts the money between the schools. Ivy Rec and Park would be a fairly significant loser, even though they get some money back, and actually the general fund would be a beneficiary of that kind of a shift. Did that make sense?
Yes, actually, that explains it differently than I understood it. So,
well, you just have to think what the state's thinking about are the northern, a lot of the northern area districts that when they form the redevelopment agencies, are taking a significant amount of money away from the state. So they're a little bit different than we are.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, it is a shell game. I'm sorry, Supervisor Wolf.
Mr. Alvarez, just so I understand what you were just talking about, as we had mentioned before, the county would be getting $2,185,000 in RDA money. Are you suggesting that a portion of that then should be segregated out for the housing piece and that we should identify that separately?
Chair Farr, Supervisor Wolf, no, that's not the case. There was certain activities that related to the housing. They might have had some payments coming in or some interest that were not part of our tax revenues coming in. The money that we just got were the tax revenues that were coming in. There would be no change in that allocation, but some of these other activities from housing activities are flowing through the county, and they will continue to do so as separate operating. You might almost think of it as those were originally accounted for with all the ROPS payments that would be occurring on the debt payments. So it's just really the activity within the agencies that existed for the successor portion that's continuing, if that's
And do you
clear.
know the amount? Do you have an estimate of the amount?
I'll defer to Mr. Geis or if he's got an update on that.
Madam Chair and Supervisor Wolf, the amount that will come back to our successor housing agency is very minimal. It is the residual receipt payments that we're getting on outstanding loans, at least the annual reoccurring portion. This year we booked about $65,000 of that. Next year we only have $18,000 budgeted for that. So the amount we're getting off the residual receipt loans is fairly insignificant, but we would want that money to continue to operate, you know, the agreements that we have. So it would be vital for, you know, HCD to get some continuation money. Now there are other opportunities maybe for some more money to come back to the successor agency that are significant, and those are related to the loans that we have out for the construction contracts, like on the Loop project. That's about $1.6 million, and that could come back to fund operations of the successor agencies, but it's a little bit unclear. And we don't have a clear answer for that. The legislation's ambiguous, and I think that's one of those issues that we would figure out into the future.
Okay, I guess my suggestion, if you could do this, is to have a special or specific line item in their budget that is specific to this RDA, so that's not commingled with the entire department, so that if there are, well, as you just stated, it looks like we're going to have some obligations. So, you know, let's keep that IV piece separate.
Madam Chair and Supervisor Wolf, they have a separate fund, and so they'll have their own fund and they'll have their own structure, so it's very well segregated.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions or comments for Mr. Alvarez or any of the other staff? All right, thank you. Next part of the presentation. Ms. Nisich, are you?
Yes, Madam Chair, members of the board, I'd like to give you a brief update on the status of the governor's May revise. I believe as I've been sitting here for the last couple minutes, I've revised my presentation 3 times, so this is the most up-to-date it can be. As you're aware, Governor Brown released the May revision on May 14th. The county departments have reviewed the document and consulted with their professional organizations to ascertain specific impacts to Santa Barbara County. It's important to note that the information presented while relying on the governor's office materials has been subject to continual changes over the last several weeks. As of this date, as was just mentioned by CEO Waller, negotiations continue in Sacramento, and critical trailer bills which provide detail on program funding and implementation are not yet in print. However, based on the most recent information received, there are several areas that pose concern to county governments. Within the May revision, the governor attempted to address a $16 million estimated budget deficit. This was caused by lower than anticipated state revenues, increasing school costs, and federal government and courts' blockage of previously proposed cuts. A critical component of the May revise is predicated on the voters' approval of the governor's proposed November statewide ballot initiative. Should the measure not pass, the May revision reflects several trigger cuts slated to occur in order for the state to meet cash flow needs. These trigger cuts are primarily aimed at education. Go to the next slide. Overall, in terms of impacts to the county, the first area is realignment. This is still taking form, actually. When the legislature passed the 2011 realignment package, the funding structure was only for one fiscal year. Representatives of various counties, the County Administrator's Office Association, and the Governor's Office have been working to devise a permanent structure to the allocation of this revenue. As of this date, a tentative agreement has been reached regarding the allocation of funds to counties for the next 2 fiscal years. The County Administrative Office Association, which includes CEO Waller, is working on this topic and has agreed to again reconvene to examine data and look at outcomes in order to devise a funding structure for the long term. In administration of justice, specifically in the area of probation, the governor proposes to keep the Division of Juvenile Justice open for placements. However, he now proposes to charge counties $2,000 per month per ward committed to the Department of Juvenile Justice. Locally, the direct impact to the probation department will be approximately $140,000 annually to fund the cost of each ward. This amount has not been considered in their proposed budget document. Also mentioned on Monday by the sheriff, he is continuing to work with the state to identify remaining AB 900 monies to continue to fund the capital component of the jail. We just received notice that the piece of legislation that he had referred to on Monday has been numbered and is being considered in the legislative process. In the area of agriculture and natural resources, there's an overall proposed reduction to the state budget of $2.5 million to the California Department of Food and Agriculture. This is in addition to the $30 million already proposed by the governor in the original budget. Programs slated for reduction include invasive pest prevention, food safety, and border control stations. Here, the County of Santa Barbara Agricultural Commissioner's Office works in partnership with the state agency. The additional reduction in program funding is anticipated to result in a 30% reduction in services locally pertaining to prevention and treatment of invasive pest programs and other related programs. Therefore, our direct funding is not decreased. However, our agricultural commissioner's ability to partner with the state to resolve issues will be compromised in that the state is cutting the availability of those programs. In the area of health and human services, this area is again slated to sustain significant cuts. They are specifically in the area of CalWORKs, and within CalWORKs there is a number of grant cuts and eligibility changes, creating significant, complicated program redesign within the CalWORKs system, saving the state over $879 million. I should say, before I go into great detail, this is another area that we just received a recent proposal on. There appears to be some move at the state level among the Democratic Party to refund or reinstate many of these proposed cuts. Again, that has not been determined yet, so I will outline for you specifically what is in the governor's budget at this time. Under the governor's proposal, the current CalWORKs program would be replaced by a 3-pronged system consisting of CalWORKs programs, Basic and Plus, and a new child maintenance program. Although these programs would serve the same population as current programs, an estimated 75% of participants would face a minimum 27% cut to their grant levels. The new CalWORK Basic program resembles the Welfare to Work program, with changes that include reducing aid to 24 months unless other strict criteria is met. In the CalWORKs Plus program, as proposed, CalWORKs recipients who are meeting the federal work participation rate requirements per week, unless families have children under age 6, which is then 20 hours per week, would be in the CalWORKs Plus program. All supportive services, including child care, would be provided through the CalWORKs Plus program. The child maintenance program, also a subset of CalWORKs, This program is intended to replace the current child-only component of CalWORKs. The Child Maintenance Program grant will be, again, 27% less than the current child-only program, which results in a decrease of the actual average monthly grant in child-only cases from $463 a month to $392 a month. Overall, it's estimated that approximately 3,800 families in Santa Barbara County will be removed from our CalWORKs program and placed in this new program outside of CalWORKs, and correspondingly, these families would experience an overall reduction in benefits ranging anywhere between 27% and upwards of 64%. In addition, the Social Services Department would be responsible for implementing major restructuring changes to implement the new eligibility requirements. Beginning in 12-13, the state budget process also proposes to provide subsidized child care only to those individuals who meet the CalWORKs work participation requirements. In addition, the funding for child care eligibility would be provided to the counties via a block grant and administered through social services agencies. In other words, our Social Services Department would then become the administrator of the child care programs. Collectively, in Santa Barbara County, approximately 656 families receive Stage 2 subsidized child care, and 173 families receive Stage 3 care. Subsidized child care programs and services currently in place within the County of Santa Barbara geographic area as a result of many of the programmatic changes are anticipated to decline by 30% or up to 800 slots for children and families. This will also result in a loss of jobs and closures of centers within the county. In the area of in-home support services, the governor's prior proposal in the budget included a 20% reduction to in-home support services. This proposal was delayed by a court injunction. However, a 3.6% reduction was in place in the governor's budget. In the May revision, an across-the-board reduction of 7% to IHSS hours is now proposed and effective August of 2012. Therefore, in total, a 7% reduction is an additional 3.4% cut over existing levels. And the governor is proposing that 7% cut. It's anticipated that IHSS clients would not be entitled to apply for supplemental services and would not have any hearing rights. Therefore, they would have no ability to contest any reduction to their hours. Domestic and related services to certain recipients would be eliminated. For children receiving IHSS, living with their parents, domestic and related services would no longer be allowed. Statewide, this impacts 278,000 clients and saves the state $150 million general fund dollars. I should state that the state is working directly with CSAC to determine other opportunities to secure funding for these critical services, which would ideally stabilize funding and bring more certainty to this program. There are presently 2,800 clients locally within the in-home support services system in Santa Barbara County. As a result of the proposed 7% reduction in hours, it's anticipated the average recipient will lose approximately 6.1 hours per month of assistance. A concern on a per-client basis is that this reduction of this magnitude would no longer provide individuals the opportunity to stay within their homes. In regards to the elimination of domestic and related services to certain recipients, over 50% or 1,500 of the 2,800 clients in Santa Barbara County lived in shared housing or with others that are not IHSS recipients. Under this proposal, all of the clients, both children and adults, would have domestic and related services impacted, and we're estimating that would be about a 36-hour per month reduction in service hours. Finally, in the area of First Five and child support, there is a proposed cut from First Five state monies of $40 million. That money is supposed to be redirected and used for Medi-Cal services for children birth through age 5. The local impact is that while there's no direct immediate loss to our First Five program, however, there is an impact on our future ability to leverage local money with state money to begin to draw down state contracts. In the area of child support, the governor proposes to suspend the county share of child support collections and reduce funding to local agencies by $14.7 million. As noted by Carrie Topliff during her presentation on child support services, that will result in a $175,000 reduction directly to the department, which she is working currently to manage. In terms of next steps on the actual budget, as of the preparation of this memo, as I stated, or the presentation, as I stated, the state has not adopted the May revision. It's anticipated they will adopt the budget on Friday, however. We're continuing to track the budget and work with our departments, and we're also working with CSAC and our legislative representatives to continue to comment to them on technical adjustments as well as overall impacts to not only Santa Barbara County but all counties. So that concludes my presentation on the state budget. I'm happy to answer any questions, and then we also have a quick slide on realignment or redevelopment legislation.
Thank you. Supervisor Carbajal.
Thank you. Most of this depends on what happens in November. Are you saying that those cuts are going to occur as of Friday, or do they come with triggers for November?
Madam Chair and Supervisor Carbajal, the cuts that I listed here as part of the revise would occur now. If the November initiative does not pass, an additional $6 billion in cuts would result, and those are then targeted primarily to education. So these would go in place as of budget adoption.
Any other? It is very grim. Other questions or comments? Ms. Nisich, why don't you go into your next slide then?
Just to follow up quickly on the redevelopment agency legislation, there are a couple of key items to make note of, and then again, as CEO Waller mentioned, there are new proposals now on the table that specifically deal with the negotiated pass-throughs to other agencies. One of the key pieces of legislation to be aware of, however, is AB 26. This is the key trailer bill which addresses all of the technical and administrative and procedural policy issues pertaining to redevelopment agency dissolution statewide. There's several key provisions that the county should be most interested in that reaffirm the authority of the state and our local auditor controller to have authority to require the return of funds improperly spent or transferred to public entities within 60 days. In addition, if the funds are not returned within that time, they may be recovered by the local auditor controller via an offset to sales and use tax allocation to the local agency. There's also a provision for penalty payments. Another component of AB 26 within the cleanup provides that if an obligation bond is to be included as part of the recognized obligation payment schedule and was not an enforceable obligation or improperly paid or proposed to be paid from property tax revenue, the auditor controller can deduct from the amount of property tax that would otherwise have been deposited into the ROPS fund on behalf of the successor agency and distribute to the taxing agencies. Many of the changes that are reflected with AB 26 work to meet the governor's primary goal of distributing the proceeds from the redevelopment agencies quickly to the taxing agencies. So these two again give authority not only to the state but the local entities to continue to move those funds. AB 1585, which was authored by Speaker Perez, would also enable housing agencies to keep their uncommitted balance of housing tax increment and further allow that local governments previously declined a successor agency could now become one. This bill is not advantageous to the county as it would restrict the total amount of tax increment which would flow to the county and other taxing entities from former redevelopment agencies, I should say, within our jurisdiction. The next bill actually just died, SB 986 Dutton. This, however, was another bill to address the use of unencumbered balances or any unspent portions of bond proceeds. But again, it did die this morning on the floor. The last item that I would bring to the board's attention, just to speak to the the fluid nature of redevelopment agencies. Certainly, the League of California Cities is most interested in the disposition of all redevelopment agencies and their funds. They are working very aggressively at the state level to regain much of what may have been lost to them as part of their overall housing programs as well as their projects. So again, they are working very aggressively and continuing to lobby for legislation that from a professional perspective would not be advantageous to counties nor the state, because it would again be restricting the amount of assets that could be transferred to the various taxing entities. But that should be the bill that we should be watching most closely. That concludes my presentation.
Thank you, Ms. Nisich. It seems like in following all of this that the governor has made it very clear that he's really not interested in signing any legislation that is going to undo what was already done in the dissolution of RDAs. Is that a fair assessment?
Yes, Madam Chair, I would agree with that, because it is a critical component of the budget and his budget balancing strategy. He is very interested in continuing to move these quickly.
Okay, so something like the first one that you talked about goes more in the direction that the governor wants, but the others do not.
Correct.
All right, and then the litigation that's out there, given the fact that the dissolution of RDAs was litigated the first time and the courts came down squarely on the side of the governor and the legislature, do we really have any reason to be optimistic that any litigation that's going forward on this is going to have any greater level of success?
Madam Chair, I'd like to refer that to Mr. Gazzoni. He's closer to that, obviously.
Thank you, Mr. Gazzoni.
Madam Chair, board members, on May 22nd, initially 9 cities, now 12, brought suit challenging some provisions, again, of ABX 26. Their real focus was not on the substance of ABX 26, but on Department of Finance's, what they're referring to as unauthorized directives, essentially regulation through frequently asked questions on a website. The other 2 prongs of the litigation address sequestering disputed funds at the local level, for the auditor, for example, our auditor controller, although we are not a party to that litigation, will be informed by the result of that litigation. And then several of the jurisdictions, several of the counties who were brought into the suit had failed to make their May 16th payments of former tax increment to the successor agencies. So that litigation really involves more procedural aspects of ABX 26 than any kind of do-over on ABX 26.
Okay, so the way that we're handling the money now isn't jeopardized in any way by any of this that's going on.
Madam Chair, board members, we've actually worked very closely with auditor controller on this, and including discussions with our own successor agencies throughout the county who had questions about the sequestration, and we are not involved in litigation on this, and will really just be informed by any judgment of the court. Probably the only benefit we would see out of this is the potential for some guidance from the court as to how Department of Finance is using a website FAQ section to direct local government.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions or comments for this part? Yes, Ms. Nisich?
Yes, Madam Chair, just very quickly. I summarized this very quickly in the interest of time, but there is a detailed memo that our office has prepared that will be distributed once we know a bit more, but it will provide far more detail in each of the areas of reduction.
Okay, thank you. That will be very helpful. Okay, now we're going to go right into outside organizations and non-county agencies to requests. How are these being handled in the same way as a kind of public comment? Mr. Allen, how are we doing these?
Yes, Madam Chair, and we have 22 requests to speak.
All right.
So we're going to start off with Andy Caldwell, and then Christina Pizarro will be next.
Three for right now.
Madam Chair, members of the board, I'm Andy Caldwell representing CoLab. We didn't get a chance earlier to speak on risk management, and one of the things I wanted to draw to your attention is that For instance, in 2010-11, the general fund contribution to this department was $14.8 million. Next year, it's going to be $19.2. So even though the department's been making progress, that's a significant chunk of change for quote-unquote risk management. One of the other issues is, for instance, we've been talking a lot about privatization. One of the things that the county could privatize is vehicle maintenance. There's a lot of people out there out of work that could work on cars, they can work on heavy equipment, and you're not paying retirement costs, again, for that. And I think you ought to give them a chance to bid. I know that there's some cities in the North County that have had private people doing vehicle maintenance on even police cars and such. The other issue is that we wanted to bring up again in a little bit more detail. It has to do with the Children's Health Initiative. This is $1 million a year. We want children to be healthy. And we realize there was not a dental program before, and we think you need to continue that. However, because the public health centers treat people regardless of ability to pay, and hospitals and things like that can't turn kids away, the fact is the care is there. There's a difference between paying $1 million a year for insurance versus getting $1 million a year in actual care. It's not the same. And we think you can't afford to pay for insurance for some that might not ever go to the doctor and then turn away people, like for instance with the PUF and all those other sorts of things that are in critical need but they can't get in. You need to, I think you need to put that $1 million back into play. The bottom line here is the state of California has been lying to the public for 4 or 5 years about the status of their budget. It's just a bald-faced lie. They don't have a $16 billion deficit. It's more over $50 billion. They're not including, just like you guys don't include pension debt when you do their budget, they don't include all the money they owe when they do their budget. And we believe things are only going to get worse, and you need to prepare for the worst, which gets back to those points that we used Supervisor Wolf's comment as a springboard of starting to really make priority decisions here. I thank you for your generosity in most of the segments, and I will see you on Friday. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Caldwell. You know, as we move forward here, if you are here to speak to represent an outside organization or an agency, or in the case of who's ever going to make the presentation for the Human Services Commission, you can have 3 minutes. If you are here to speak in support of one of these requests, then I'm hoping that you can keep it to 2 minutes.
Our next speaker is Christina Pizarro, and then we're going to go to Santa Maria for Leroy Scolari.
Just getting ready for my colleague to go ahead and be ready here. Okay, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Christina Pizarro, and I'm a commissioner from the 1st District representing the Human Services Commission. We're all very concerned about the future of the Human Services Fund. Last year, we received one-time funding from the reserves and were removed for the first time in 34 years from the county's general budget. This year, if funding is not restored, a critical element of the county's public safety net will vanish, and with it, a partnership between our government and many of our nonprofit agencies, a public-private partnership that has benefited the most needy of our residents. The 8-to-1 ratio that our nonprofits have calculated is based on these facts. Of all the agencies we propose funding for, 28% will lose federal and state matching monies without our grants, and 89% will lose foundation and private funding without our grants because of the rigorous vetting the Human Services Commission conducts inspires trust among funders. Nonprofits use funds with great efficiency. That and volunteerism also contributes to the multiplier effect. Therefore, cutting $1.2 million will actually cost our community $9.6 million. Oops, sorry. Community services funding to the Human Services Commission has a positive impact. Reduction of which is negative, coupled with economic downturn, another negative outcome, produces an increase in demand for these services. Collectively, this is a negative loop. Maintenance of these funds appears as an expense, hence it is shown as a negative, followed by strategic alignment of funding. A positive activity by the Human Services Commission meets the polar negative of the increased demand, which equals a positive loop and a positive outcome. Next slide. Briefly, some of the examples of services you will fund would be food, children and families, mental health, housing and shelter, advocacy, and seniors, which is the fastest growing group, population group. Here's a quick look at a few of our current and prospective grantees. Monies are allocated according to not according to population centers, but rather according to the greatest need, with the lion's share of the funding going to North County. The way it looks on the map, go ahead. In its 2012 platform, the County of Santa Barbara outlined in its legislative principles the importance of maintaining and enhancing the safety net services. I ask that your budget include full funding of the $1.2 million and remind you that it is purely funding and includes no staff or any overhead. Please consider the full and permanent implementation of the Human Services Fund back into the general budget, as this community investment has been proven productive for over 36 years. And thank you very much for your request. Thank you very much for your consideration of our request. And I'd also like to thank my colleagues on the commission and Commissioner Rabay Sabastrova for creating this presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Pizarro. That was certainly very well done. Appreciate that information.
Thank you.
We're going to go to Santa Maria for our next speaker. That's Leroy Scolari, and then following Mr. Scolari is Mary Harris in Santa Maria.
Mr. Scolari, are you still there? Is Mary Harris there?
Then Hilda Rodriguez.
Is this also for Santa Maria? There's,
Do I speak
okay.
now?
Mary, is Mr. Scolari there?
Mary, is Mr. Scolari there? Leroy Scolari still?
No.
No. Okay.
He probably left.
Go ahead then.
I'm Mary Harris. Okay. Well, I'm Mary Harris. I'm with the Guadalupe Senior Center. And first of all, I'd like to encourage you to reinstate the Human Services Commission and make it permanent. We have been suffering for lack of funds at the Guadalupe Senior Center, and it's really a place where so many of us seniors meet every day. We have a nutritious lunch there. We laugh, talk, play games, puzzles, listen to music, and without this, they would have very little to do but sit at home, and if they have a TV, watch it. We really strongly encourage you to reinstate and make it permanent so the funds would be there for us. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mary.
Hilda Rodriguez, to be followed by Guadalupe Amendivi.
Hola, mi nombre es Hilda Rodríguez. Yo soy sobreviviente de cáncer 2 veces. Servicios Familiares a mí me ayudó en llenar formas para el medical.
Yes, I'll be translating for Hilda. She just mentioned that she's a cancer survivor for the 2nd time, and the Family Service Center helped her in many ways.
Y traducción y transportación en mis citas, ya que eran hasta Paso Robles.
They provided services such as transportation, translation to my appointments. For some appointments, I had to go to Paso Robles to attend my appointments.
Y yo quiero que restauren los fondos porque si los quitan, no vamos a tener quien nos lleve a nuestras citas y no vamos a tener transportación.
So for that reason, the Human Services funding is very important for it to stay in 2011 as it was in 2011 and to continue to be there. If they take this type of funding, we're not going to be able to have services available like those services that I receive, such as transportation that I mentioned.
También he recibido comida, mucha ayuda que ellas me han brindado y yo quiero que sigan igual.
Another service that I received was food, and for that reason I would like for the services to continue because I have benefit from the services. Thank you.
Thank you.
Our next speaker is Guadalupe Mendeville, to be followed by Irene Plasencia.
Ok, mi nombre es Guadalupe Mendivil y la razón de la que estamos aquí es para que nos ayuden a que no nos vayan a quitar los servicios. Yo he recibido el servicio de transportación, interpretación, ayuda con programas para mis hijos y por favor si pueden dejar el servicio.
Hi everybody, my name is Guadalupe Mendivil, and the reason that I'm here is so you don't cut the fundings that we have. The services that I have received are translation, also transportation, and some other services for my kids.
Y si por favor pueden dejar los servicios porque es mucha ayuda, porque nos ayudan a llenar todo lo que necesitamos y ellos mismos nos guían a lo que vamos a ocupar en los siguientes pasos que nos pidan.
So I would like to ask you if you can please leave this funding because it has made a difference in my life, and they provide a lot of assistance in those services.
Y pedimos a ver si nos los pueden dejar el servicio permanentemente. Gracias.
And if you can leave this funding permanently, I will appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Irene Plasencia, to be followed by Irma Espinoza.
Hi, my name is Irma Espinoza. I wanted to ask you if you could please leave the funding because we really need it. I had spinal meningitis. I had been really sick and I had a lot of problems with my children also. And they received counseling, the counseling that they needed because I wasn't able to really care for my child. Also, I went to the hospital, to UCLA. I had to be transferred over there and have a shunt put in my head. And I didn't have transportation. We were low on funds, and I didn't have transportation to get home. And they helped me get home. And not only that, they took me to my doctor's appointments. I'm real thankful for that. And then they guided me, like helping me fill out my Social Security papers. They helped me in a lot of ways, and with food and clothes, for my kids. So, and the counseling's still there. They still helping me right now to this day. So I just really hope that you just leave the, Human Services fundings permanently because there's a lot of people that do really need it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Is Irene Plasencia there?
No, she's not.
Okay, then we go with Gail Pratt, please.
Chair Farr and Board of Supervisors, my name is Gail Pratt. I have the privilege of wearing a number of volunteer hats within Santa Barbara County. My volunteer roles vary, but lately the meeting agendas look similar, the impact of the budget cuts. I have come to know many of the good people who will be impacted, and it is personal. And therefore, I know that in preparation for today, you have read a stack of heart-wrenching emails and letters, and face an enormous task of balancing a budget that's riddled with tough decisions. For your time and effort, you have my sincere respect. Maybe there is a solution that will make your job a bit easier. A specific volunteer hat that I wear is to work with the people of the petroleum industry to raise money for education-related projects that bring math, science, and technology alive for students through the Central Coast Education Collaborative. In addition to distributing more than $200,000 in the last 4 years, the professionals in this industry have logged thousands of mentor hours helping students build wave generation devices, wind turbines, and making real-life applications from the textbook. This is a good thing. We want to do more. Therefore, I wanted to endorse Supervisor Gray's comments to take a look at the petroleum projects within our county to generate revenue so that projects like the CCEC flourish and the all-important tasks of the Health and Human Services Department are not reduced, but are given a full complement of resources needed to improve the lives of our friends and neighbors. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Ben Romo, here in Santa Barbara, to be followed by Lynn Carlson.
Good afternoon, Mr. Romo. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me. And I'm speaking today just as a private citizen, though resident of the 2nd District. Thank you, Janet. In recent years, you know, we've kind of had this conversation about Human Services Commission funding over and over again each year, coming back and having the same conversation. And I want to really support the continued funding of Human Services Commission funding at its current level. And, you know, I think the county receives tremendous value and benefit from those funds. The services that are funded by the Human Services Commission funding is supporting services that nonprofits can provide at a much better return on the investment. And these services are provided to folks who, if they do not receive those services, can really fall into a situation of crisis where they'll need additional county services and end up costing taxpayers money in the long run. So in the immediate term, I don't think it makes sense to cut these funds. And in the long term, this is what I really wanted to say today was, I think this conversation, perhaps, you know, I know the staff and the board are looking at really creating fiscally, structurally sound budgeting processes in the long term. And I think this presents an opportunity to have a more informed conversation as a community for how we deal with, through collaboration and coordination with all of our community partners, how we deal with our most daunting social service and human need issues. And specifically, to that end, I would ask the board to consider endorsing the establishment of a community-led effort, something that I would call the Human Services Working Group, that could consist of county representatives, Human Services Commission members, local foundations, nonprofits, representatives from these key sectors, and especially from the business sector, to come in and study the county's current spending and services in the area of human and social services and throughout departments, and really analyzing as well the nonprofit community and the philanthropic community to look for those opportunities where county services can be coordinated and better met with those potential partners. So I think the working group would be an excellent opportunity to, or a venue through which to continue the good work that the county is doing with the Santa Barbara Foundation on your poverty scan. And it would provide an independent and unbiased analysis of how key county departments and local nonprofits and other government entities could partner with those philanthropic nonprofit sector entities out there.
Thank you, Mr. Romo.
Thank you.
Madam Chair.
Yes, actually, it sounds like, Mr. Romo, you might want to stay at the podium there for a moment. Both Supervisor Carbajal first and Supervisor Gray have a question.
Mr. Romo, I think you have an excellent idea, and I know you and I talked about this in advance of the hearing today, and I appreciate you suggesting that it not be a government-led effort, but rather it just evolved from the community. And I think it's a great idea. The question is, when this effort does evolve, I think nothing's wrong with us endorsing or promoting such participation. I think the key will be at the initial meeting of such partnership is scoping out what is that agenda, what are those services, and what the timing of it, because the poverty study is hopefully going to do a little bit of that. But I just wanted to tell you, I think it's a great idea.
Well, I appreciate that.
And how we can participate, Madam CEO, I don't know what it'll take from our board to give an affirmation or not, or bring this as another item in the future, but I think it's a wonderful idea.
Well, I'd like to also just commend the CEO and the county administrator's office for the good work that they're doing on this, and looking at those models that are out there, collective impact models that are under consideration in our community and being implemented by collective groups of partners. This is a longer term discussion. I think critical first step is the preservation of Human Services Commission funding now, so that the county can move forward as an active partner with the nonprofit community in being a leader, a credible leader on this kind of conversation.
Supervisor Gray?
I think it's an excellent idea. Also, I was just wanting to have you go over one more time who you envision as being on the working group.
Sure.
Thank you.
Well, this is just, I'm throwing it out there.
Oh.
It's a working group, and who would be on such a body would, I think, best be defined by a good group of leading many minds coming together and thinking about that. But I was just suggesting 2 members of the Board of Supervisors, 2 members of the Human Services Commission, representatives of potentially 2 nonprofits that are not receiving maybe direct county funding, so they don't have a vested interest in the process, 2 leading leaders from the philanthropic community, our local foundation community, that is, and then leaders from the business community. And I think also probably representatives from labor organizations within the county might be another area to look. Within the faith community, this is a community of very, very many wonderful committed community members who are willing to give their time and expertise, and we have a lot of that expertise and human capital here that I think could help provide the county with some additional support and an outside eye. Not just the county, but also, again, looking at the nonprofit sector, and where, especially in my professional life, working in North County, seeing the large base of support, the large number of nonprofits that are serving South County, and just knowing how difficult it is for those nonprofits to take that critical step of moving to North County, where there's significantly higher social service needs. How can we as a community enhance the capacity of those organizations or invest in the capacity of existing organizations in North County, so we're helping the county meet those really disproportionate social service needs in North County? That just came to mind. So I don't even know what brought that up, but thought I'd say it.
Well, we like it. So.
Okay, well, thanks.
Thank you. All right.
Madam
Supervisor
Chair,
Carvajal.
Mr. Romo, I hope you can articulate, Mr. Romo? Don't get all congratulatory just yet, okay? You can't be high-fiving just yet. I think you ought to write something up, get people involved, and then come back to our CEO, and I'm sure she'll provide you some insight as to how, who, what, when this could
I'd be happy to
maybe
do that.
Unfold in the future. But I like what you told me earlier. It shouldn't be a government-led effort. The question is how.
Should not be a government-led, but government-endorsed. I think.
And government participation.
Absolutely. Government is critical. The county is critical. You know, if it's not being led by the county, I think the county ought to be an active participant.
Absolutely.
Invest it or endorse it so that county departments know that it's a priority.
When Ben and I discussed this, the word task force came up, and he almost fainted.
Yeah.
He said, "No government task force."
I'm all task forced out.
Thank you.
Thanks.
All right, next speaker, Mr. Allen.
Lynn Carlson, and to be followed by Nancy Madsen.
Madam Chair, Supervisors, Lynn Carlson. I'm Executive Director of the Youth and Family Services branch of the Y, and I'm representing today two programs that receive funding, the Isla Vista Teen Center and My Home at Artisan Court, which is a supportive transitional housing program for foster youth. Since I seem to be here every year, it's probably safe to say that you struggle with these funding issues every year. And if the issues represented by all my colleagues in yellow are important to you and important to your constituents, I believe there's really no better way at this point to support them than by supporting the Human Services Commission funding. For all of the human reasons that have been expressed, but as an economist, I'd like to say for good economic reasons. You know, My Home, one of our funded programs, came in 25% under its expense budget this year because of in-kind and volunteer support that reduced real costs, like actual budget cash costs. And in Isla Vista, we've had a philanthropist step forward and really offer to build a permanent building to support and replace the crumbling Isla Vista Park and Rec temporary modular that's been our home at the Teen Center for too long. And while the building will actually end up belonging to the Isla Vista Park and Rec department, the gifts being made to support our programs and because of our involvement. And those are just two really simple examples. As nonprofits, you know this, we can bring reserves to the table, resources to the table that better support our communities, better serve constituents, but we really do need your help. And the public-private partnership is powerful, but we'd ask you to please support our partnership by supporting that youth and by supporting the Human Services funding. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Allen?
Nancy Madsen, followed by Michael Foley.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, members of the board. I'm Nancy Madsen. I'm speaking to you today as a private citizen, having recently retired from county employment. I'm happy to say that for 15 years I've been involved with the Human Services Commission, first as a commissioner for 1st District, appointed by our esteemed Naomi Schwartz, and then for 13 years acting as staff for the commission. I want to do 3 things today: congratulate you, appreciate you, and encourage you. First, I congratulate you. As a group among you, you have created an incredible commission. This is a diverse commission, diverse in age, gender, ethnicity, political viewpoint, professional experience, and they work so beautifully together. In spite of these differences, the sum is greater than the parts. And I want you to know how hard they work. They do needs assessments, they monitor your grantees, and they are very cooperative with each other. It's been a joy to work with them. This commission is also very well aware of emerging trends in the area of nonprofit funding, including the collective impact model that's coming up. They do this through in-services and through attending conferences on your behalf. Secondly, to appreciate you. Your board for decades now has provided this ongoing funding from general fund for the Human Services Fund grantees. You've heard about the safety net, the public-private partnership, so I won't repeat that, but you should congratulate yourselves for being so mindful of how efficient this process is for your constituents. People say, what does Human Services do anyway? And my elevator speech has always said, these grants serve prenatal care to end-of-life care and everything in between, for the hungry, the homeless, the elderly, the young, families. It's a beautiful thing. So what I want to do is to encourage you to do 3 things, to make 3 decisions today. 1, restore this funding to general fund ongoing, so that every year you don't need to hear the same song and dance over and over again. And just establish as a priority for this county that general fund will go for this kind of funding. 2, as a practical matter, it would be good if you would renew existing grants for 2 years. This will allow your commission, first of all, it will allow the safety net to continue. Secondly, it would allow your commission to work with the kind of group that Mr. Romo has so brilliantly explained. He's already talked to the chair of your commission. And my 3rd point, before I heard Mr. Romo say it so well, was to encourage you to work directly with the larger community, a few representatives from your board, to look carefully at the way funding is handled, to look at collective impact, and to really study this. But it's going to take some time and some real expertise. Meanwhile, things should be renewed. So this is what I wanted to do, to congratulate you, to appreciate you, and to encourage you to continue on. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Michael Foley, be followed by Bertram Willoughby.
Madam Chair, members of the board. I'm here today, this afternoon actually, representing Casa Esperanza Homeless Center and also representing Good Samaritan. Unfortunately, Sylvia Bernard is feeling ill, and she had to go. But we've created a proposal together requesting $127,960 for us to continue what has been one of the most successful homeless efforts in the last decade, which is rapid rehousing. Under the American Recovery Act, the federal government provided millions of dollars across the country to help people who had been homeless, who have received jobs or benefits, to have access to deposit money and to have access to first month's rent as grants to allow them to immediately go from homelessness into housing. That's been incredibly successful. Here in the county over the last 31 months, 986 households received that funding, which accounted for 2,337 people. I'm not sure if you can imagine what would have happened had these people not had that. And I can tell you one of the things is that our shelter system, which is already backlogged, would have been significantly backlogged. The idea that somebody who has been homeless and has secured a job, it can take them months to save enough money for their first month's rent and deposit. The ARA funds end in August. We will not have access to that funding. And with unemployment and the problems that we still have, we see that problem continuing. So we were able to secure $45,000 through the emergency shelter grant for rapid rehousing, but that doesn't remotely cover it. About 2 months ago, however, we found that we could, in working with the cities, tweak the current home funding to be able to use home funds in the same way that we used the shelter grant, the rapid rehousing grants. So we have secured $360,000 for that purpose. $100,000 from the City of Santa Maria, $135,000 from the City of Santa Barbara, $45,000 from ESG in the county, and thanks to the folks at Community Services, we were too late for the initial home funding, but they have home program funds, and they've been able to locate $80,000 to get us to the point where we think we can house enough people. What's missing right now is the staffing. We need to have one case manager in Santa Maria and one in Santa Barbara. And we need a little bit of money, $48,000, in order to administer the program. So with all this work that's gone in, we're asking you to provide that funding so that we can duplicate, except for the fact that people will need to have 30% of their deposits saved in order to get into housing, which is a requirement of home. We think that if we secure this funding, we can go to the philanthropic sources to also help us help folks who can't save that 30% and keep our system moving forward and have that tied specifically to the proposal that's come to you for the Homeless Services Reorganization, because that is completely tied to rapid rehousing. The HEARTH Act requires that shelter services decline and that housing go up. If we don't have access to that money, we fail and we lose potential funding.
Thank you, Mr. Foley.
Bertram Willoughby to be followed by Bill Moose.
Madam Chair, I have a question.
Yes.
I saw you saying the same thing. Mr. Foley, is this $128,000, or is this inside the Human Services Commission budget, or is it a different budget?
This is an expansion.
Totally new?
Yeah, this would
last minute.
That's exactly correct. Exactly correct.
Thank you. Thank you. And it would fund, Mr. Foley?
Sorry.
Sorry.
Sorry, Mr. Foley.
Don't be in such a hurry to leave. Okay. So it would fund an executive, direct?
No, it will fund 2 case managers who will do direct service with the people, getting them into their housing. So 2 housing case managers. So we have access to the housing funds. Every single person has to go through a case management process of developing a budget that shows that they can live independently and self-sufficiently, and they qualify for that funding. So we have 2 case managers, and then the compilation of data and the follow-up of making sure people are still housed 3, 6, 12 months into the future, and that we can account for it with the county. We need the accounting funds. That's what we need to finish that project.
So do we lose the $360,000 that you've already put together if, in fact, you cannot raise this?
We could. Our boards would have to make a decision to do away with existing case management services, which are, for the most part, vital, or to figure out how to do this. We don't see the funding for this at this point, but in future ESG funding, we do see the potential to be able to have this funded.
Any money from home available?
We're going to work with HCD. At this point, everything we've raised, we think is specifically designated for the TBRA component, the rental assistance. The last thing, just to finish up on your question, was what comes next, and what comes, for instance, what Supervisor Farr is going to talk about. And that's when Supervisor Carbajal said that rapid rehousing relates to savings, savings, savings. And there was an article in the LA Times that I came to you and talked to you about the success of Project 50 recently, which is a rapid rehousing program. And on Friday, the County of Los Angeles released a full study on the success of that program. And in 2 years, by housing people, it saved the county over $250,000. So you can read this and see that there's continuing evidence of success, that these investments equal savings within a 2-year period.
Madam Chair, Mr. Foley.
Yes, Supervisor Lavignon.
I'm going through this, and I mean, I think a lot of us have our priorities of where we need to put money, and believe me, I've put my restoration together here in homeless. The homeless areas is important to me, but I'm very disturbed that we go through this whole thing. We've been going 18 hours now, and I mean, I've been in contact with Sylvia many times, and for us to get it at the last second like this, I don't have backup documents. I mean, you know, it makes it real difficult for us with a laundry list of priorities, and everybody's got their story, to have something dropped on us where, I mean, I don't really have anything on it. I haven't had a chance to talk to staff about it. I would feel very uncomfortable moving forward on something that we haven't vetted out. Is there a reason why we're just getting it now, or?
Well, once again, we thought that we didn't know that we were going to have access to home funding in order to save this project. And we did, by the deadline, submit. And when you go through your budget documents, there is a very lengthy letter that Sylvia and I did indeed put together. So I understand the last minute component of it, but it literally was, what are we going to do? And when we finally were able to secure the home funding from the county, we felt that it would be wrong of us not to come and ask to finish the program.
Supervisor Gray.
One more question. In all of the talking about beds and homeless and you know, I know that there was a bed if there wasn't a psychiatric bed, but then they were also talking about places for people to go after they left that part. Does this fit in there at all, or is this totally different?
Well, when it comes to beds in this, the idea is that someone give you an example, somebody who's been chronically homeless and they're able to secure disability. Mm-hmm. They don't have to languish in the shelter system for months. You can take them and immediately put them in housing. Someone who's been homeless and secures a job, they don't have to sit in the shelter system for months. They can go right into housing. And what that does is it opens up shelter beds for more people to come in, and you don't end up with a backlog and waiting lists and more and more people on State Street and in front of McDonald's in Lompoc and in the Lompoc shelters and in Santa Maria.
And like the shelters in Santa Maria where the families have to stay because there's no place for them to go.
Correct.
Okay.
This is what has solved that problem across the country, and a year after people have been placed, 80% of them are still housed.
Thank you, Mr. Foley.
Thank you.
Bertram Willoughby, to be followed by Bill Moosleg.
I believe Bert Willoughby had to leave.
How about Bill? Bill or Billy? Okay. Then we're going to go with Nancy Edmondson and the Reverend Julia Hamilton. To be followed by Carol Schweizer.
Mike, how many more after that? Madam Chair, if we could have about 5 minutes to combine 3 minutes and a 2-minute.
Sure.
We'll try to finish sooner.
And this is for both of you together?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you. So hello, I'm Nancy Edmondson. I'm Director of Administration at the Unitarian Society. It's good to be back here again this year. And this is Reverend Julia Hamilton. We have been involved, I've been involved for 3 years with the Warming Center project. This completes our 2nd year of the Unitarian Society serving as fiscal agency for that county-wide program. We did send you a full report yesterday, so we won't go into all of those details. We'd just like to highlight some of the details and our request that's before you today. We'd like to let you know also how this fits in the overall services of programs, how the warming centers fit into homeless services. And we'd like to explain our necessity for continued public funding and to answer any questions that you might have. In reviewing the past year, we want to let you know that we added 3 more host congregations to our network of interfaith communities, making a total of 11 different faith communities that opened their doors. That's a very good thing, because our guest count jumped from 1,736 last year to 2,856 that were served countywide. That's a 65% increase, and we were scrambling to keep up, frankly, with the number of people who showed up. Our average guest count per night countywide jumped from 50 to 82 individuals. On some nights, we hosted nearly 100 people in downtown Santa Barbara alone. Although our total cost of operations went up, the good news is that our cost per person per night remained stable at $38 per person. We've also increased our community partnerships, and we're grateful to be working with Doctors Without Walls and Easy Lift Transportation.
I'd like to take a moment to describe how the warming centers fit into the bigger picture of services for people without homes. So, for example, on a typical night, say January 19th, there were 67 men and women sleeping on the floor of the Unitarian Society. There were 15 people sleeping at the Korean Methodist Church in Isla Vista. There were another 10 on cots at New Life Christian in Lompoc. The temperature had been in the low 30s for the 4th day in a row, and a storm was coming through that would keep us open for an 8-day stretch. By this time, the Casa Esperanza emergency beds are completely full. The rescue mission has an overflow capacity where there are women sleeping on the floor of their chapel if they have to. The Salvation Army has some emergency beds, but those are only for people who can demonstrate sobriety. And as you know, the warming centers have a very open door policy. Anyone who can adhere to our idea of a respectful, quiet night is welcome, no matter what else they're holding in their life at that time. So we are a critical piece of this bigger picture of services. We are big fans of the collective impact idea, and the warming centers are really there to catch those people who can't manage anywhere else. We hope that some of them will find their way into traditional shelters and into housing as quickly as possible, but they can't do that if they can't survive. And so this really is the last resort for so many people, so many more and more people each year, unfortunately, in the times we're living in. Especially as we're looking to crisis in shelter beds, like Mike Foley said, there's more people turning up to need the work of the warming centers. And we also are a piece of that potential for the collective volunteer impact. The warming centers operate as a connection point between members of the community who want to serve and their faith communities in particular, and a place where they can be of service. So we look forward to working with the Common Ground reorganization to help funnel those volunteers to the places where they can be the most useful and really maximize our impact that way. Looking at our capacity in Santa Barbara, we realized that this year we really reached the maximum number of people we thought we could house here in downtown. We're looking at possibilities in Goleta and Carpinteria. Faith communities have approached us to find out if there's potential sites in those locations. That would mean we would need a little bit more money in order to support the staffing, the overnight on-call staff for those locations. The warming centers are really a three-legged stool, public, private, nonprofit partnership that has worked exceptionally well. It's allowed the faith communities, our private donors and nonprofits to partner with public monies, and it keeps us really in close collaboration with the civic agencies and organizations that provide support, and so it allows us to know where we can be most effective but not duplicating the efforts of other organizations. And the Unitarian Society can't do this alone. We really need your support to help make this happen. An example of how effective this is what happened in Lompoc. So the last time I was here speaking with you, we were dealing with the crisis in Lompoc around the closing of Bridge House and the shelters there. And the warming centers really were able to provide a critical response that allowed you the flexibility to find a solution that didn't leave people out in the cold. And we try to be responsive to the needs that are different in North County and South County, and we hope that we can stay that flexible partner with you in this work.
So we're requesting $50,000 from your general funds today. My report included 2 budget scenarios. One is if we receive $30,000 from you, we anticipate that we can continue to operate for the next 3 years, and that would utilize our fundraising reserve. If we do not receive the $30,000 to sustain how we've operated in the past year, we would use the entirety of our fundraising reserve next year, and we'd anticipate that we would not operate after that year. In addition, our request includes $20,000 that would leverage additional foundation and private donor funds to open the centers in Goleta and Carpinteria. So those are our highlights for you, and if you have any questions, we're happy to answer them.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your presentation. I want you to stay there just a moment. Supervisor Levin,
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to thank you for the work that you do, and I want to get you hooked up with my office because I think you'd be a great outlet for, I'm sure a lot of those people coming into your warming centers are veterans. Yes. And we have our stand down in October, and so I want to make sure you have all the materials and everything that we can get out to the veterans.
That would be fantastic. Right. And I'd be remiss if I didn't mention there are about a dozen members of our congregation and other volunteers here today to show support for this work.
Okay. Did you want to have them raise their hand?
Sure, go ahead, raise your
people
hands.
Here? All right, thank you. Thank you for being here.
That's not polite. Okay.
All right, Supervisor Wolf.
Thank you. Thank you for being here. What I'm trying to understand is that there's in a service level impact, there was a reduction of $45,000. Is that the same?
No, that's something else. That's contracts from, right, Housing and Community Development to shelters.
It's CSD number 2.
I believe that's correct. Mr. Parker, could you come and address us, please, on that? I don't know if you were
the shelters,
listening. What we're talking about is the $45,000 service level impact that you have related to homeless shelters.
It says here, and I'll just read it as you're sitting down. This reduction in shelter services general fund pass-through contributions to emergency shelter providers will result in a potential reduction of bed nights available in support of services provided to clients.
Madam Chair, Supervisor Wolf, that is correct. We had $345,000 total that was budgeted for shelter services in our general fund shelter services. We propose to cut that by 13%, or $45,000.
So those contracts go to shelters. They're talking about the warming centers, which, correct, take people and are only open during really bad weather.
Right. So we funded that before was that out of contingency? Because I mean, I know we funded it, I guess. So
right.
Where did we fund that from?
There is, Madam Chair, Supervisor Wolf, there is $25,000 that is specifically for, out of that $300,000 that's specifically for warming shelters.
Okay, so so that is not being cut. We are still providing the $20,000.
That is correct.
Okay, so now on top of the 20, you're asking for an additional 30?
We're asking for 50. If you've got 20, we're asking for 30 more.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Chairwoman, Supervisor, I think we just want to be clear. I don't know that $25,000 that's in there is necessarily able to be allocated for the specific request that you have in front of you, so I don't want that to be confused.
Well, I would say then maybe for Friday that we get some clarity on the warming shelters. What, because we have done it before, 25 or whatever, and we need to know if that is still in our budget for next year. CEO Waller?
Yes, we will do that, and we will also define specifically, because that actually covered several different shelter locations. So we'll have all that available for you.
Okay, so, but I think that their program is unique. The program that's overseen by the Unitarian Society. So I think, aside from all the other shelters, just their program that they described, how much money is the county giving to Unitarian or to their organization right now? And then, have you given us a request in writing for your $50,000?
Yes. It's in the written report that we sent to you yesterday.
Okay, so we have it on file then. Okay.
Thank you, Supervisor Wolf. Supervisor Carbajal?
Reverend, did you get my email response?
Yes, I did. Thank you
You know
very
where I
much.
stand on this. Okay.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. And thank you for the wonderful work that you've been doing on this. This has just been tremendous since the Unitarian Church has taken over responsibility and been the fiscal agent. And certainly, as you reported, have served so many more people. And we did have a lot of very cold nights and extended operations that we weren't able to do before. So thank you again. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, and we appreciate your support. We really do look forward to continuing partnering with you.
Before
Supervisor
you,
Wolf?
thank you. Are we giving any of our human services grant money to you?
8,000.
I get a little confused by this, honestly. We did receive a 3-year human services grant. We received the first year in the year we've just finished, and we have 2 future years. If you're looking in my budget scenario, that's $8,830. That's what we received from county human services grants.
So assuming the Human Services Commission grants would be funded again, you would get $8,000 from them.
That is correct.
Okay.
Along with whatever we may be giving you out of general fund, if we're giving you anything.
Correct.
Okay. And are you getting any funds from the city of Santa Barbara?
Yes. That's detailed in my report. Would you like me to answer specifically? Got it right here.
CEO Wall.
I was just going to say that we were going to include in our response back to you an actual copy of what was submitted, so that possibly will answer some of your questions
Okay,
as well.
we'll leave it at that then.
We do have funds from Santa Barbara and from Goleta.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Thank you.
so
Thank you
much.
again. Mr. Allen?
Our next speaker is Carol Schweizer, to be followed by Fran Foreman.
Carol? Carol not here? Oh, wait a minute.
Hopefully it's obvious that I'm not Carol.
Excuse me, before you start, after you're done, we will need you to fill out a speaker slip so we have it for the record. So go ahead and state your name for the record.
Okay, great. Carol was not able to stay here long enough, and so I'm pitching in. So I apologize for my dress, and I apologize for speaking off the cuff. My name is Glenn Batchelor. I'm also a volunteer with the warming centers, but primarily as a fundraiser. And I want to give you just one additional perspective that wasn't mentioned in the last section, and why the support is so very much needed. I've been working for 2 years raising money on a private level, and the support from the county is just absolutely crucial to those efforts. For several reasons. Number one, it's very, very clear this organization is a very new organization in its current state, and it's almost like a toddler, if you will. So the capacity is really not there yet to raise enough from a private standpoint to really keep the warming centers going. So that's really the first reason. The second is that as you get out there and talk to people on a private level, it gives credibility to the organization, and it gives credibility to the fundraising effort that the county and the city and others are supporting it. So it absolutely makes a difference in terms of from a private standpoint. The third thing is that we are actively looking at trying to come up with a permanent solution for this organization, and it may be a standalone organization or something like that, and within just a matter of a couple of years. And this funding now gives us the runway to be able to do that. So maybe X number of years from now, the requests won't be as crucial as they are today. So thank you for your consideration. I know you've spent some time on this, and thank you so much for your past support. And hopefully we make the best decision for all concerned. Thank you.
Thank you for being here and for your efforts.
Fran Foreman, to be followed by Louise Curry.
Hi. My name is Fran Foreman, and I'm the Executive Director of the Community Action Commission of Santa Barbara County. Our mission is creating opportunities for families in the county to achieve stability. We have 400 staff, 30 sites across the county. We try to do this by helping people stay warm in their homes and safe, providing high-quality early care and education, youth programs, food. We dearly understand the current situation right now. We're actually sitting on pins and needles around many of our funding sources. With the presentation you had by Ms. Nisich, that will directly affect our ability to provide services about what's happening on a state level. Just within the county, we are great partners with the county. We work with many departments. I'll name a few: probation, health, the sheriff, the courts, ADMHS, and social services. Our newest partnership, I'm so excited about. Last time I spoke with you, we were being congratulated for the Youth Corps, and I wanted to thank the General Services Department and the Public Works Department for providing work for our Youth Corps. But we are not new to the realities of the current situation. CAC, as a provider of services, and many from the county, have already experienced a $400,000 decrease in our services from the county. So we understand what's happening now, and we've made adjustments, and believe some of it will bring efficiencies. I'm here today to talk about the Human Services funding, which is direct funding to our organization for food and for seniors. We run a healthy lunch program. Almost 800 people are served on a daily basis. Nobody is turned away. We request $3 a meal, and we receive on the average 90 cents a meal. We found that it's a real challenge to raise money for this particular program. Another portion that we receive is also for the community of Guadalupe. We run the senior center there. There is no funding for that. We were asked to take that over. We did with no funding. And there is a hero to that story, and that is Mr. Aristone Julian. I wanted to mention his name because there's no funding to fix that center, which now has a mold problem, and we're fixing it with volunteer labor. It's Aristone Julian and his family that comes weekends to fix that, to fix our center. So partially of the funding that we get goes to pay for the services at the Guadalupe Senior Center and our Healthy Lunch program. I just ask that you keep that in the budget and don't make us come every year. I hate the way I look in yellow. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Ms. Foreman.
Louise Curry, to be followed by Luann Miller.
Well, I found enough yellow in my wardrobe to make this work. My name is Louise Curry. I'm a registered nurse. I'm a former county employee with mental health services and what was then public health services. And I worked for the county for 32 years, and I have served nothing but vulnerable populations. Both mentally ill and frail elderly, particularly in geriatric assessment, where I met Salud when he came to work for the county. I think one of the things that I need to say in argument for human services is that many of the topics that were hit today, like protective pay, case management, dealing with the homeless population, are all issues that vulnerable populations need for services in order to survive. It isn't just an issue of, making them do better. It's a survival question, and there is absolutely no question but that public and private services can and must work together to make this happen. Also, I'm now the case manager of my own husband's care, and he goes to the Friendship Center in Goleta, and I am completely appreciative of that because it enables me to have a little bit of a life when he's there. And it's just wonderful what they have done for him and what they have done for me. So that's my middle age, young, and senior situation. However, I also became aware of the need for children and their care when my own daughter became mentally ill, and I needed to call on Children's Protective Services to save the lives of my 3 grandchildren, which they did. Then my daughter unfortunately died, and we adopted 2 of the 3 children. All 3 were adopted eventually. And the oldest one, when she was 8, became a volunteer in a preschool. And this launched her into the career she has today, which is in the IVYP program, where she is employed. That has encouraged her to have her daughter, who's here in the audience, Melody, who's 13, who has volunteered for 2 years there as her school volunteer program. And Melody's brother, Taylor, who has sat here for 5 hours for the opportunity to let you know that he doesn't want his school closed. So we have to also recognize that these little people are vulnerable. And oh, wow.
That's my cookie.
But we're into sharing.
Taylor was just telling me he was hungry. You want to come get it? These little guys are vulnerable too, and their parents are vulnerable because in this day and age, both parents need to work, and we know that. And without there being safe childcare, that wouldn't happen. In order to thank Children's Protective Services for 5 years, my husband and I operated a daycare for infants and toddlers because we recognized there was a real need for this. And I did it as long as I physically could.
Thank you very much.
And I just really wanted to tell you that it's the vulnerable populations that you need to look out for, whatever way you can. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Luann Miller, to be followed by Heidi Hawley.
Good afternoon. Taylor was actually happy to miss his nap today. I'm Luann Miller. I'm the Executive Director of Isla Vista Youth Projects, an agency with 40 years of experience with children and families, resulting in long-term and positive outcomes for the community of Isla Vista. I've been there for 28 years, and for most of those years, I've come before you every June. So here I am again. Pleasure to see you all. Working with our partners, we welcome each and every child in Isla Vista to our Thrive community, providing childcare, access to health appointments, case management, counseling, parent education, and programs to improve community well-being. An example of our effectiveness in partnerships. If we look at Isla Vista, it's demonstrated by the distinction that was recently given to Isla Vista School as a California Distinguished School. We have effective programs with proven collective impact. We are funded approximately $35,000 a year through Human Services funding, which draws down, and this is my conservative estimate, $340,000 each year. Another way to say that, we maximize each one of your dollars tenfold with money from other sources. Another way to say that, for every dollar you invest in Isla Vista, and I'm sure it's comparable in the other agencies who are funded, we make it $10. I challenge you to find that same level of efficiency anywhere. Human Services funded should not only be totally funded, but it should become a general, once again, become a general fund line item in your budget. As much as I love coming to see you, I also don't like yellow. So thank you very much for your time and attention. I know it's been a long, grueling day, and I appreciate the time and effort and consideration that you're giving in balancing the budget. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for being here.
Heidi Hawley, to be followed by Terry Allison.
Mike.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair and members of the board. My name is Heidi Hawley, and I'm the Executive Director at Friendship Center. And Friendship Center offers an adult day program for aging and dependent adults and a much-needed break for their often overworked caregiver. A recent study by Robert Wood Johnson Foundation concluded that the nation only has 1/3 of the adult day programs that it needs. The demand comes mainly from working caregivers juggling job demands and family responsibilities. And this will only grow as our baby boomers start retiring and aging in about 5 years. I'm here to ask for your kind consideration to restore the County Human Services Commission funding and also keep the funding ongoing. I do like coming before you too every June, but it would be great to be able to have the partnership, which I would like to echo what Mr. Romo was pointing out about having and forming a work group so that we can partner together and enhance this process as well. I think it's a fabulous idea. In addition, nonprofits provide frontline emergency services of keeping families intact from the frail, elderly, vulnerable populations, which Louise was referring to, as well as to young children. And nonprofits continue to receive significant funding cuts from both the public and private sources, and we continue to do more with less. In conclusion, nonprofits partner with the county to serve our most vulnerable residents. Please sustain human services funds for our very worthy nonprofits in our community so we can continue to do our good work. Thank you.
Thank you.
Terry Allison, to be followed by Rob Fredericks, who's our final speaker.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Terry Allison from Storyteller Children's Center, and my colleagues have spoken very eloquently about the need to continue the human services funding. And the only thing that I would like to add is that the nonprofit sector is a very important part of the economic viability of the county, and we're employers, consumers, and we're helping others to become employed and consumers as well. So, that I would just want to emphasize, what we do as an economic part of this counter. So, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, and thank you for being here and waiting.
Rob Fredericks.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair and Supervisors. I'm Rob Fredericks, Deputy Executive Director of the Housing Authority, and this afternoon I'm representing Common Ground Santa Barbara. I'm here to ask you to please support human services funding, and more specifically to provide funding in the amount of $75,000 in matching funds for the Homeless Coordinator Partnership. During the May 15th board meeting, there was unanimous support among your board for the concept of the merger of homeless services, as well as widespread community support. 3 conditions must be met in place. Must be in place in launching the proposed homeless services restructure, which is based on, yet again, the phrase collective impact approach. That phrase is being bandied about today, but in a positive way, because that model is one that works. And those 3 conditions are: 1, there needs to be adequate influential champions; 2, a sense of urgency for change; and 3, adequate financial resources. The first 2 conditions are in place. We need your support, among others, for the financial resources to be put in place. This request would match the City of Santa Barbara's financial commitment towards this effort. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Fredericks. Okay, the board's going to take about a 5 to 7 minute stretch here for all of us. We're going to come back and wrap up with the presentation on general revenues and the budget hearing summary, and then we'll see what the board wants to do after that. Okay?